Hey, middle-aged musician here. Still got the wrist thing on. Today, I wanted to talk not a gear review, but go over something a lot of my students ask about. A lot of people try and figure out. I'm going to talk about playing melody and specifically mixing melody and lead playing. Something if you play an instrument like the banjo kind of ends up second nature most of the time, but on the guitar a lot of people struggle with this. Some people just struggle just finding melodies playing lead. So I'm going to talk about this in three parts. The first part I'm going to talk about is using a scale. We're going to at least start with a major scale. This applies to other scales, and I'll demonstrate just a little bit about how melodies sound using different scales. The second thing I'm going to talk about is just finding the melody, and kind of, as I usually tell people, attaching your ears to your fingers. And then the third thing is just integrating that melody into a song. And I'm going to use a real simple old folk song, Will a Circle Be Unbroken, because it's easy to demonstrate this. So anyway, stick with me as we dig into these topics, and I hope you enjoy the content. Thanks. So the first thing to discuss are scales. Scales are collections of intervals or collections of notes that are distances apart. We can talk about them being a whole step apart, which for a guitar player is 2 frets, or a half step apart, which is just 1 fret. Or more than that. We can talk about them, but we'll kind of start with the major scale. I tell people that's really the foundation in Western music of all the other scales. We can talk about minor scale, natural minor, harmonic minor. We can talk about the modal scales, Ionian C major scale. We can talk about Dorian, Mixolydian, Phrygian, Locrian. We can talk about those in terms of the major scale, just making changes to them. But without getting ahead of myself, we'll just talk about the major scale, kind of whole step, half step. I mean, you can kind of play that on one string. But most people with guitar, one nice thing is a lot of times we'll think about patterns. So the common kind of first way you'll learn the major scale pattern looks like this, right? So, and I forgot to highlight this other root. There we go. So 7-note scales. These are all 7-note scales, and versus like a pentatonic, which is a 5-note scale. Basically, you take a 7-note scale and you remove 2 notes. But so we have our root, our tonic root. So that is, if we're playing a G major scale, that would be a G. If we're playing a C major scale, that would be a C. That's the key tone in the scale, and it's what we name it after. And we can think about that being sort of the center of the melody line. When we talk about something being in the key of G, that means that we're using this scale with that tonic root of G. Or if we're talking about the key of C, again, we would apply this scale to that. And if that seems confusing, don't worry. I'm going to explain a concept here in a moment called playing diatonically, which hopefully will make that a little more clear. But for now, we'll think about this pattern, which, I'm only doing the first octave and starting with the root on the low E string in standard tuning. So you kind of see this pattern here, and you notice if we walk down, we have I'll just get this backwards. There we go. That's our root, and then the next note, 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 the next note. And you'll say, well, there's 8 notes. Well, that's because we have gone all the way up and resolved to the root. So really in the scale, this guy isn't there. There's just 7 notes. If we play a G major scale, starting on a G, that first note would be a G. Our next note would be an A. Then we have a B, C, and D, an E, an F sharp, and a G. So we can number these, so as I've done here. And a lot of times we'll talk about those as the scale degrees or the intervals. So when you hear musicians talking in numbers, this is usually what they're talking about. Basically it means if I take the scale and I write out the notes in order from my root all the way through that octave, through the whole scale, that's the position it's in. My G is my first note. The second note in a G major scale is an A. The third note in a G major scale is a B. Fourth note in a G major scale is a C, so forth and so on. So that's kind of a quick overview of that, and I'll demonstrate that, kind of play through a few things here for you to show you a little bit more. Okay, so major scale, and we'll talk about G major scale, but first let's just talk about the intervals. So the major scale, we can talk about these intervals being a whole step or 2 frets. Here we're going to play any major scale. 1, whole step to our 2, whole step to our 3, half step to our 4, whole step to our 5, whole step to our 6, whole step to our 7, half step. And what do I mean by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Again, it's the order of the notes in the scale. The first note we play, the second note we play, the third note we play, the fourth note we play. But times for guitar players, we'll talk about using a pattern. So the pattern we're going to use looks like this. So what is that? Well, we're going to start with our root. We're playing G major, so we're going to start with a G. We're going to go up a whole step to this A. Now, for us to go the next whole step to our third, we just go to the next string. Then we have our 4th, 5th, go to the next string, 6, 7. Now we have our octave, or G. So the first 7 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and back to our root. In this case, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. But this pattern is useful to memorize. You don't have to remember what the notes are necessarily. You can just use this pattern and move it around. If I want to play it in A, I use the same pattern. I'm only using the first octave, so I don't have to worry about the B string, but same thing. Go to a C. And so I usually tell people, if you're kind of thinking about it in terms of your left hand, or right hand if you're a left-handed guitarist, who plays left-handed, and we use kind of 1 finger per fret. We're going to start middle, pinky, first, middle, pinky, first, ring, pinky. And so that's kind of the gist of the G major scale and what that looks like. Okay, so that's major scale, a little bit about scales. The next thing we're going to talk about is kind of how you use that, or one way you use that. Use the scale, define melodies, define chord progressions, define chords. Those kind of the three main uses. So again, you'll use the scale you're in. First of all, it's going to dictate the notes that you can use for melodies. It's also going to dictate the notes you use for the chords and what the chords are themselves. And I'll show you that here in a minute. And the third thing it's going to tell you is what the notes are in those chords. So this comes to a idea called playing diatonically. So what diatonically means is if you are playing in a key, we'll go back to the key of G, all of the notes you use for the melody and all of the notes you use for the chords come from that key. So in the key of G, everything you play, all the chords you play, all the melodies you play are going to be from that G scale, that G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. If you're playing in the key of C, no sharps, no flats, everything's going to be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So that's what that means. Diatonically means you're playing only with notes within that scale. When you differ from that, which you can, that's called using chromatics or atonality. But for now, we're just going to stick with this. So here's a little written demonstration, and try and hold this so it's not tilting. So you can see here's our G major scale. It has a G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. And previously we had numbered those, right? G's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are their position in the scale. The G is the first note in the scale, A is a second note, B is a third note, C is a fourth note, on and on. So if that makes sense, we can go forward. If not, go ahead and rewind and maybe watch again. Hopefully it'll make more sense kind of with a second viewing. So these are also our chords. So when we talk about, say, a 1-4-5 progression, which is probably the most common chord progression in rock, country, and blues, we're taking the first note, the fourth note, and the fifth note. In the case of G, it's G, C, and D, and those are going to be our chords. So again, these notes not only represent the position in the scale, in that interval, these are also, we'll refer to them, that position by the chord. And there's some rules around different scales and what's major, what's minor, etc. And the reason there are rules is because we try and stay diatonic. We try and only use the notes that are in the scale. So in the case of a major scale, the first, fourth, and fifth notes or intervals are major. The second, third, and sixth are minor. And the seventh is what's called a diminished. And if you're not familiar with what a diminished is, it's like a minor chord, but we also flatten the 5. In all of these chords, 3-note chords, tritones, triads, the thirds are flattened for a minor chord. That's essentially what makes a minor scale. One of the minor modes or minor scales, minor, is that flat third. So we have, if we go through and we look at how we construct these triads, we're always going to take, every time we make one of these chords, a triad. For a basic triad, I should specify that, a G chord, an E chord, an F chord, whatever, we take the 1, the 3, and the 5 out of the scale. So for a G, that's G, B, and D. So this is probably going by fairly quickly if you're not used to it. So let me cover this again. We have our scale. If we line out the notes that are in the scale, 1 to 7, because there's 7 notes, then we can apply those numbers to the position that note occupies in that scale. So in case of a G major scale, we start with a G, that's our 1, our root. The next note we play in a G major scale is an A, that's going to be a 2. The next note we play is going to be a 3, that's a C. These also correspond to the chords we would play. So we have some form of a G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp chord in our that we can use in playing the chord progressions if we're staying diatonic, meaning we only use these notes in everything we play. So in order to stay diatonic, we make sure that we only use these notes when we play those chords. So that's going to essentially dictate which ones of these are major, which ones are minor, but it always follows that same pattern. So we know, because of that the 1, 4, and 5 are always going to be major when you're playing in a major key. The 2, 3, and 6 are always going to be minor, and the F sharp, the 7 is going to be a little bit special because it's diminished. It has a flat 5 as well as that flat 3 that the other minor chords have. So back to this, if we look at those chords, our 1 chord is a G chord, and you'll notice it has a G, a B, and a D. A minor has an A, C, and E. And you can kind of figure out what those notes are going to be because it's the first, third, and fourth note from the scale. So you just start on B minor. You go, okay, there's my B. I go over 2 notes to get to my third, that's a D. 2 more notes, I get to my F sharp. C chord, I start on my C, go up 2, E, go up 2, I wrap back around to G. There's a C, E, and G, and a C chord. D chord has a D, F sharp, and an A. E minor chord has an E, a G, and a B, and the F sharp diminished has an F, A, and C. This is the most difficult thing I'm going to talk about today. And it's a little bit tricky to wrap your head around. I kind of have to, a lot of times, pen and paper, and you kind of write out the chords and think about the keys can be helpful. But this is the most, one of the more important things is that when we're playing these melodies, if we want to stay diatonic, and there are times when you can differ from that, but we're not going to cover that today, these are the notes you're going to use. So if we're playing a song in the key of G, the notes we're going to play are G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. So again, the most difficult thing I'm going to talk about today, and it's a little tricky to wrap your head around at first, but hopefully I didn't make it too confusing for you. So we've talked about the scale, and now we've talked about playing diatonically, and the notes are in there. So let's kind of just look at that, right? So let's look at a G chord. We're demonstrating using G major, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So G, we usually play one of two ways, either like this, which has a G, B, D, G, B, G, or G, B, D, G, D, G. So it's really whether we have an extra 3 or extra 5 in there. The next chord we have is an A minor. So there's an A. And let me just back up one second. Let's look at kind of where these notes are. This is our 1, 3, 5. And we'll just focus on kind of that first part. 1, 3, 5. Everything's a 1, a 3, or a 5. And kind of where they are situated. It can be important later. We're not going to worry about it too much, but yeah. So then, let's talk about an A chord, A minor chord. We have an A, E, which is A is our 1, E is our 5 now on the A scale, not on the G major scale, but on the A. So we're going to take the corresponding notes from that corresponding scale. So when we're playing a G chord, we take the 1, 3, and 5 from the G scale. We play A minor, we take the 1, 3, and 5 from the A minor scale. When we play a B, we take the 1, 3, and 5 from the B major scale, or B minor scale. We're going to play B minor, I'm sorry. C, we're going to take the 1, 3, and 5 from the C scale. D, we're going to take the 1, 3, and 5 from the D scale. But the 1, 3, and 5 from all of those other scales we're using to build those chords, those same notes are in the G major scale because we're playing diatonically. Again, this can be a little bit confusing, but we're using just the notes from the G major scale to build the chords, and those first, thirds, and fifths from those from the scales that correlate to the notes on our scale also happen to be in the G major scale. They don't happen to be. That's the kind of the math behind how all this works. So we take the G, we got G, B, D, got A, E, and A, E, A, and C. B, D, F sharp, C, E, G, D is D, F sharp, and A. Although our thirds up here now. E minors, E, G, and B, and then we've got this diminished chord, which has F, kind of darker sounding chord, so we have those notes that are in the chords and the scale. So now we've talked about the scale and how we use that and this concept of playing diatonically, which means we're going to limit ourselves to these notes. G major, we're going to limit ourselves to G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, those 7 notes. And so one thing I tell a lot of my students is when you are learning a scale, a way of achieving 2 things. One is reinforcing that scale shape, and the other thing is attaching your fingers to your ears, your fingers to your ears. And what I mean by that is we're going to do two things. One is we're going to be able to figure out, have something in our head, a melody that we know in our head that we can hear, and we're going to translate that to our fingers. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of figure out relative pitch. That is, if we're hunting for something, am I low, am I high, or am I just right? Right? And oftentimes kind of listening to these intervals back and forth will give you a little bit of a sense of 1 and 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 7. That, call that the leading tone, because your brain can't handle that too long. You really want it to resolve to the octave. But kind of getting that sense. So how do you do that? Well, the way I tell people is think of every childhood melody you ever learned. For example, or you could do right. And so you just kind of hunt for Old MacDonald, Three Blind Mice, When the Saints Come Marching In. You can do all those on the major scale, and so you can find that melody, and that helps to kind of, that's a little bit of how you find that melody is you hear it in your head, and you kind of sing it to yourself. And always that high or low. Well, that's not right. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. No, that's not right. Twinkle, twinkle. Right. The other thing you could do, it's a little bit fun when you learn other scales. You take that and you move it to a different scale. So you can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and in natural minor. Right. So it sounds a little bit different, but that's where we're going to start. We're going to, okay, let me find a melody using the scale. Not just kind of blindly, well, is that the right note? Is that the right note? We're going to say, okay, I'm going to play this in this key, and let's find that melody. Right? And so you kind of hum it to yourself. And you find that melody. And once you can do that, you have essentially the tools you need, other than just some physical skills, to be able to play melody and rhythm together, to mix the two, to alternate between the two. You know what notes you can play, and you have the ability to kind of find that melody. So then we move on to the final part, which is putting it all. So yeah, lots of theory, a little bit of playing, going through things. Now we're going to put everything together. I'm going to use a song called Can the Circle Be Unbroken, which I'm most familiar with the Carter family variation on it. A little history on that song. It's originally Will the Circle Be Unbroken as a gospel song written in 1907 by Ader Haberchin and I can't remember his first name, something Gabriel. 1935, the Carter family, A.P. Carter, and the Carter family released their version, Can the Circle Be Unbroken, which is more of a funeral song, and kind of reworked the layout of the song and that. There are multiple other versions of this song. They're out there that tweak it a little bit. The Monroe Brothers, George Jones, other people have done it. There's tons and tons and tons of variations on it. But anyway, we're going to use that song. It's a simple song, and try and demonstrate how you take these melodies, in this case we're playing in the key of G, and mix it in with the 1-4-5 chord progression of the key of G. So we're going to use the notes from the G major scale, and we're going to play them, make the melody, and combine that with the G, C, and D chords that correspond to the 1, 4, and 5 chord out of the key of G. So now we've talked about playing diatonically, we've talked about the scales, we've said all we need to do is plug everything back together. I'm going to use a really easy 1-4-5 progression in the key of G. Again, that's the first note in our scale, the fourth note in our scale, fifth note in our scale. It happens to be a G, C, and D, all major chords. This is a very common chord progression. So we have that G, C, and D. So the progression itself kind of has that kind of. So with that basic rhythm of, we repeat that 4 times on the G, twice on the C, twice on the G. And then we repeat the same thing, but instead of going to C, we play 4 times on the G, 2 times on the D, 2 times on the G. And what we're going to do is we're going to think about that melody line. Will the circle be unbroken? And what we're going to do is we're going to use that G major scale and find that melody. We're going to go just a little bit outside this first octave I showed you because we're going to pick up a couple of extra notes and it'll allow us to kind of emphasize our strong notes where we want them to be. So the strongest note in your scale is going to be the root. In the case of G, that's going to be G. That is where our brain wants to go. That's going to have the most strength. It's where we're going to want to resolve. The second most strong is the 5. In this case, the D. Those are our 2 strongest notes. But we're going to pick up some other notes along the way, and we could extend this further up, but we're actually going to go down. And so what we're going to do, we have a root here, we have a root here. Now if we remember when we go up the octave, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the difference between our root and that 7 is just 1 fret or 1 semitone. So if our G is our root, that means we have another 7 here. We also, 2 frets down from that 7, we have our 6, that E. So E, F sharp, G is a 6, 7, 1. We're going to use that as we build this melody. So as a circle, will this circle, or is it, will the circle? Can the circle be unbroken? So so we hear that melody. And we can kind of play around a little bit. We hear that melody and we can play around with it. So the trick is to build that into our chords. And one reason why I'm starting here is because it's easy to do these walk-ups to say that G and C are really common, and especially this style of music. So we're gonna, what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about following the vocal line with a melody. And we're gonna think about the strumming is filling the gaps between the melody, or the vocal lines. So you kind of think, okay, when we're following the vocal line, that melody, we're gonna play these single notes. And when we're not, we're kind of doing the strumming. So if we put it together, playing this really slow, sometimes it messes me up when I play these things really slow, but. Walking up to that G from E, F sharp, G, 1, 2, 3, strum. Now I'm going to go to that third or that B on the A string. B, A, G, B. Same thing, I'm walking up on, but now on a C. That A, B, C, or open, 2, 3. So that 4, 3, 1. Now I'm going to go to the D. So that's kind of how you piece it together. And like I said, the tricky thing is kind of the right hand side of things at that point. But if you can kind of just think about, okay, I've got the melody line, and then I just play the rhythm. That's, you kind of put those two things together. Again, we're using the notes from the scale, and we're using the chords from the scale, and we're kind of using these chord shapes to our advantage, where it's, okay, I can play the C, I can take off there, I can walk up here, I can walk up here. And if you aren't familiar with doing that, it's a good exercise, is just practice kind of hammering on and pulling off on certain chords. Or filling in that walking up and walking down. But again, the more you kind of internalize these scale shapes, the easier it's going to be. And the more you get familiar with finding those melodies, the easier it's going to be. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. And if you have ideas for how I can make it more helpful, or if I just confused the heck out of you, let me know. And I'll try and keep some content that's useful out there. So that's it. Talk to you later.